Well, it's good to be here. As Catherine had said, I had been a professor at UWA for almost a decade in the business school, and this is my first return since I repatriated to the US back in 2017. So it's good to be back down under, good to be back with the Aussies and Kiwis and my good friends here. I may not want to go back given what's happening up in North America, so maybe we can have a chance to chat about that as well. So let me just give you a little bit about a brief background about me in terms of how I'm approaching this oration. I realize that there's some academics, but mostly people in practice. That's great. I am not pitching it as a research talk. I'm pitching it more as a provocative talk about what I think, my opinion about where the future of leadership is going and what the implications for leadership development are. Most of my career, at least for the last 25 years, have been focused on taking a scientific, scholarly perspective on developing leaders and leadership. One of the things that was kind of shocking to me when I first looked into what is the science of leadership development, that there was no science. It was just a bunch of unrelated practices that people thought were important for developing leaders and leadership. And my perspective is we have to do better than that. This question of how we develop leaders and leadership is too important just to leave it to people's opinion about how to do that. So I've been writing and researching, and that's how I approach this particular topic, more as a scientist, more as a scholar, more as an academic. But one of the things that I'd like to do is to take that and translate it into where I see some disruptions coming in that leadership development space, due primarily to artificial intelligence and all of its other related applications, with the caveat I'm not an AI expert. This is not an AI technical talk, but I do have expertise in leadership development, and what I see happening are some massive disruptions that have the potential to change this industry dramatically. And I'd like to share those with you as part of this oration. So having said that, it's always a bit of a risky business to predict the future. One of my favorite quotes is from Peter Drucker, whose name came up a couple of times yesterday, about the only thing that we can know about the future is that it'll be different. And one other thing that we know about the future is that it might be different a whole heck of a lot quicker than it's been different in the past. So Drucker, there's a connection there because his last appointment was at Claremont Graduate University, which is one of our sister colleges in the Claremont Consortium in Claremont, California. And the business school there now is the Drucker School of Management at CGU. So there is this kind of local connection. And if you don't know the name Peter Drucker, he was considered by many to be the founder of modern management and had some very forward-thinking ideas about what the future of management would be like. So with that, and even though I promised I wouldn't do a scholarly talk, my first real slide beside this quote is a reference to a journal article. So this is not a new article. This article was published in 1978. So it's coming on 50 years since this was published. When these authors talked about the notion of substitutes for leadership. What are some of the things that either are part of the task, part of the followers, or maybe part of the culture or the system that would make leadership either unnecessary or neutralize its effects? Now, given that's 50 years ago, they didn't have the foresight to predict something like artificial intelligence would potentially be another substitute for leadership. But I think that's something that we need to consider is whether or not leadership can be substituted by these super intelligent agents, bots, what have you, and what are the implications for that in terms of developing leaders and leadership or followership or human development in general. So one of the things I'd like to lay out is kind of a three-scenario case about what I see as three likely scenarios, not likely, three scenarios that are possible in terms of the implications of AI on leadership and then the implication for leadership development. So one of these is that AI turns out to be a bust. Nothing really changes. All this investment, all of this hullabaloo simply fizzles out. And as a result, programs and current practices continue to dominate the leadership development marketplace. And I do talk about it as being a marketplace. I think of the three scenarios I'm going to put up here, this is the least likely. And the reason why, even though a lot of organizations are struggling with how to implement AI, how to make AI work for them in terms of what they do, how it's going to change our life, I think, is going to be dramatic. Somebody who knows AI a lot more than me is a gentleman by the name of Kai-Fu Lee, who's called the Oracle of AI. And wrap your heads around this. He has said in an interview that he believes AI will transform human life more than electricity. More than electricity. So that's hard to wrap your head around what that could actually mean on the ground in the future, and especially in the near future. So this whole notion about AI not affecting our lives, I don't think that's a realistic way forward. And I think that's a way to get left behind in what will certainly be an AI revolution in leadership development. Here's the second scenario. We all report to the robot overlords. So there is no human leadership. Human leadership disappears. No investments in leadership development are needed. This graphic here was actually from a paper that's in the next slide, which says robots change from labor to leader. So even more than a decade ago, people were thinking about how, of course, not AI, but how robots could come to be a substitute for leadership in very real ways. So let's unpack this a little bit. Let's evaluate the evidence in terms of how likely we think this will be. And I have to tell you, up until fairly recently, I was a real skeptic. And there are reasons for that. But let's look at what evidence is out there about this notion of AI completely replacing human leadership. So here are two studies that come more from the robotics literature. The first one was published in 2011, the one on the left. It's published in 2011. The one on the right was published in 2021. So for more than a decade, people have been thinking about, researching and writing about this notion as robots as leaders and developing algorithms for the paper on the right, which was the more recent one, actually training robots to enact different leadership styles. And it was effective at doing so. The core research question is, did it matter which style? And it turned out not. But they were able to bring about this notion of training robots through AI technology to enact different leadership styles. So what are reasons why this might not have been possible? Well, one reason why it might not be possible is can you really get attached to a robot? Can you get attached to an AI bot like you would get attached to a leader? Identify with a leader, like a leader, trust a leader, follow a leader. Well, the short answer is there seems to be a lot of evidence to suggest we are falling in love with our ChatGPT robots. We are attaching ourselves to them. They are becoming our everyday constant companions. And there's even a field called Lovebotics. Lovebotics is the study of, there's a journal, you can look it up. There's a journal name called Lovebotics. And it's the study of attachment of people to non-human kinds of agents and bots. Now, this field has kind of taken a dark turn because it's become a little bit more erotic in recent days, given, let's just say, market opportunities for spousal equivalence. So this field is a very viable one, and it's really answered one of the big concerns I had about whether people could become attached to their chat GBTs. And maybe it's not everyone, but certainly there are many who are turning to these robotic, big, encompassing everything, these robotic alternatives as opposed to human connection. So when we think about leadership, the implications for leadership, one of the things that is foundational is leadership rests on a foundation of power and influence. And there are a lot of other variants on that, but when you think about power and influence, one of the foundational typologies of power and influence comes from French and Raven back in the 70s. And they had 5 sources of power, but 2 in particular were thought to be most important for leadership. The first one is expert power. Expert power is the knowledge you have due to knowing a lot of things. And clearly we cannot compete with our chat GBT friends in terms of accessing all the knowledge and data that are out there in comparison to what something that as an AI agent can do. The second one is called referent power. That's the power of liking. If people like you, you are more likely to be influenced by them. And so if you are a leader, people who identify with their leaders, like their leaders, are more likely to follow their leaders or be influenced by their leaders. So my skepticism was always around this notion that referent power, a chat GBT, a robot can't have referent power. I'm looking at the evidence here, at least the anecdotal evidence, and it suggests otherwise. So if robots can think a lot quicker than us, it doesn't, by the way, it doesn't say that they are wiser than us, all right? But they have access to expertise a lot more comprehensively and more quickly than we do, and we can develop attachments to them. What's prohibiting them from becoming leaders? Here's another one that's maybe a counter to that, which is, AI tends to be very much wants to be your friend. Very high on sycophancy, giving overly flattering feedback, adjust responses, basically telling you what you want to hear. We've all probably heard about the echo chamber, where it's a feedback loop that just amplifies what you want to hear. And that helps enhance referent power because we're much more likely to like something or someone who gives us compliments than who gives us critical feedback. AI bots are more likely to give you those compliments, even though as a leader, they maybe should be giving you more critical and constructive feedback. So that's kind of the counter of where some limits of AI bots as leaders may happen. I want to turn to another aspect of leadership that didn't get a lot of attention in our sessions today or yesterday, but I think it's an important one to consider, and that is leadership as performance. Leadership as a creative performance. Leadership as improvisation. All of these things tap into this notion of leaders and creativity are valued in our society. can AI bots be creative? It's a pretty controversial topic, and I'm going to turn to this wise, sage, great Australian by the name of Nick Cave, who has this podcast, or has this blog, online blog, called the Red Hand Files, and he takes questions from his fans or whoever logs onto the site, and one of these blog posts caught my eye, which is this notion of somebody writing in asking Nick, hey, I asked ChatGPT to write a song in the style of Nick Cave, and this is what it produced. What do you think? So I'll let you, I don't have the music to go to this, but you can read the lyrics. So what did Mr. Cave think about this song? Well, he thought that about the song. It's Nick Cave, what do you expect, right? So this is what Nick thought about the song, and basically he summed it up in saying, this song sucks. But, I'm showing this for more than just, laughs here, because he went on to write what I think is one of the most insightful, cogent overviews on some of the limitations of artificial intelligence in creative performance. And it's this. Songs arise out of suffering, by which I mean they are predicated on the complex internal human struggle of creation. And well, as far as I know, algorithms don't feel. Data don't suffer. ChatGPT has no inner being. It has been nowhere. It has endured nothing. It has not had the audacity to reach beyond its limitations, and hence it doesn't have the capacity for a shared, transcendent experience, as it has no limitations from which to transcend. ChatGPT's melancholy role is that it is destined to imitate and can never have an authentic human experience, no matter how devalued and inconsequential the human experience may in time become. I thought that was pretty damn good. The other thing that ChatGPT doesn't have that's related to leadership, it has no values. It has no morals. Do we want to be following leaders with no values and no morals? And I stand before you as an American and say that with a little bit of shame and perverse irony, right? So to follow an AI robot would mean to follow something that has no values, it has no morals, it lacks creativity, it has no experience on which to base what it does. So for that reason, I think for the time being, at least, we're safe from the robot overlords completely taking over leadership, which then raises the question of what's the third scenario? So if it's not, we all report to the robot overlords, what is it? Well, there's a remaining need for human leadership, but there's massive disruption in the leadership development space. Some practices are replaced, others are changed in dramatic ways. So I think this is a wake-up call to the profession that what we have historically relied on to develop leaders and leadership is going to look quite a bit different in a very short amount of time. Remember, the only thing we know about the future, it'll be different, and it'll be different real quick. So let's revise those three scenarios about what are the human AI bot roles that are possible. So the first one is this notion as AI as leader. So the robot is a main leader in an AI system, and it leads an entire system and acts beyond the leadership team members. So it leads within and also external to an organization. And I think there are reasons to believe that that is not the most likely possibility in the near short term. So what about AI as a support for leadership? Absolutely. So AI as a bot that facilitates leadership in different forms and works as a tool to support human leadership tasks that are enacted. And the third one is AI as intermediate leaders. AI acts as a mediator between humans to facilitate leadership processes. So the systems can be integrated within a leadership team to open new gates in terms of developmental pathways in leadership processes and leadership development. And I think both aspects of the second two bullet points are highly likely. And let me give you one example that I found in the literature. And again, this doesn't come from the leadership literature per se. It comes from something that is in the robotic literature. So the influences of robotic peer liking on emergent leadership. What is cool about this study is that rather than studying leadership as a formal process based on position, it's about who emerges into informal leadership roles in a small team, a small task team. So informal leadership, in my mind, is a lot more powerful than formal leadership in most settings. And this is one big reason why I say we need to develop everyone to have some leadership capabilities. Everyone does act like a leader. Everyone does act like a follower, not at the same time, but leadership is a dynamic process in which people step forward as leaders, step back and take on more of a follower role. I just look at this as all part of leadership and leadership participation. But the font is probably too small here, but what they did was that they had a robotic dog. And the robotic dog either liked one of the task participants over the other, or liked them both. And what they found is if the robotic dog liked you and didn't like your teammate, you were more likely to emerge as an informal leader in getting this task accomplished. A robotic dog that likes you has an influence in terms of who emerges as leaders in task teams. So this stuff has power. This stuff has influence. Even things that seem so ridiculous as, you know it's a robot, you know it's not a real dog, and yet because the dog likes you, you're more likely to feel empowered to step up as a leader. So let's talk about how leadership is changing, and then move into talking about leadership development more specifically. So we talked a little bit about this today in terms of, what is leadership? What does that mean? I put leadership 3.0 up here. Leadership 1.0 is probably the so-called great man approach to leader, the great person approach to leadership, where leadership is a force of personality. So the leadership flows only from the person who is a leader to followers. So it's a very, it was really the first way that leadership was studied as a formal scientific construct in the literature. The more recent advent, which I would call leadership 2.0, is that traditional leadership model, the structural ontology, something called, the three-legged stool, the triad, that leadership involves leaders, followers, and a shared goal. So you can't have leadership without followers. Can't have leadership without some sort of shared work or shared goals that you want to accomplish. What this does is distinguish and partition leaders and followers into two categories, where you're either one or the other. And that line is not a permeable line in this particular structural ontology. But it did recognize that followers were really important in the leadership process. This is not new. This has been with the leadership structural ontology model since probably the 70s. But I think it's changing. And it's changing to something that I would call the modern leadership model, human leadership 3.0, a functional ontology in which anyone or anything that helps to accomplish the functions or the tasks of setting direction, creating alignment, and building commitment are accomplishing leadership. So leadership is not a function of leaders, followers, and shared goals. It's anything, including AI, including people who aren't in formal leadership positions, including other things, structural issues in the organization, but anything that brings about direction, alignment, commitment can be said to be engaged in leadership. And that opens the door, this functional ontology opens the door for a lot of ways that leadership can happen other than the formal leader guiding things. So that is the foundation that I'm using to then talk about how this space is likely to be disrupted, augmented, or replaced. So what I have here is I have a slide. Oh, no, this is not the right slide. So this is talking about practices and processes that form developmental pathways. So developmental pathways are a function of the practices and processes, hopefully principle-based in organizations. Which of these practices, and I'm going to focus on practices first, are likely to be augmented, disrupted, or completely replaced by AI? And again, this is more my opinion, and I'm, again, I can't foresee the future, but from what I know of these practices and what AI can do to influence them leads me to these conclusions. Well, first of all, let me just put up here what I see as 8 common leadership development practices. It's not a comprehensive list. You may have practices that you prefer that are not on this list, but these are common ones that are used in the leadership development space, either singularly or more completely or comprehensively. Assessment for development is really a foundational one about helping people understand what they are like using formal assessments. Multi-source feedback, more commonly known as 360-degree feedback, to get an idea of how others view you and the impact of your behavior on other people. We all know about leadership coaching. Mentoring is one it can be used as a formal process. It's often more informal, but it's something that's part of the leadership development space. Assignments, using job assignments and experience for development and the lessons of experience. Action learning, which is more about team project learning around something of strategic importance to an organization. Elevating the doing, the action, with the learning, the development. Classroom training, which is still around and still part of the leadership development space. And then finally, leadership simulations. So for each of these 4, and 4 in each slide, I want to give you my perspective on how I see them either being disrupted, augmented, or replaced. So when we talk about assessment for development, I think it's going to be massively disrupted. And here's a reason why. AI can go out into the ether world and identify assessments that are tailored to what you want to learn about yourself. The reason why this is going to disrupt this in big ways is that one of the major money makers in the leader development space are proprietary assessments. So what if we have, and it's out there, what if we have assessments that are non-proprietary that still have evidence behind them that can be used and tailored to individual needs, with AI not only identifying the assessment, but delivering the assessment, scoring the assessment, and providing a feedback profile on that assessment. It can do it, and assessments are out there already free of charge that are as good or better than the ones that are proprietary. And one, for example, I use it with my students in terms of helping them understand what they are like in terms of their personality. And there's a great site out there around the International Personality Item Pool, IPIP, unfortunate acronym, but it's a free-to-use Big 5-factor personality assessment that gives you a fantastic feedback report, not only on the Big 5 factors, but the sub-facets as well. And it's free. And so these kinds of assessments are coming online quickly, that AI, if it's trained appropriately, and by the way, one thing that I have learned about AI is that you always need to ask on what data it's based on. And if the data is crap, the recommendations are crap. So there's a whole other thing about training. It's maybe not training human leaders, it's training the AI bots to use the appropriate data in order to help facilitate the development of leaders and leadership. So I think assessment for development is going to be massively disrupted. I think multi-source feedback is the same way. And there's something that can be done now in terms of, for example, you have a leadership competency model in an organization, but you don't have a 360-degree feedback tool. You can use AI and a function called automated item generation to basically generate a 360-degree instrument that AI can then administer, could then use it to score it, then to create the profile, and then have a debriefing session. So again, things that typical providers in the leadership development space do now for a fee are likely to be done for free by AI very soon. Coaching. There's some really bad news here. Really bad news. I think it'll be replaced. I mean, coaching tends to come with a significant investment in terms of money. Even in the best of cases, you have access to your coach maybe, a couple times a month? I mean, if it's, if you're really bad, you get it once a week, right? But if you have an AI partner, you don't have to set up a coaching meeting because that coach is right there with you all the time and can help you make sense of what your experience what experience you've just had in real time. Help you extract the lessons from experience in real time and not wait for a couple weeks to have a coaching session with someone. It's possible, and I think already, and we're seeing this at least in parts of the States, the coaching market is oversaturated. Way more coaches than what organizations are using now. And it may be that some of them are already going into this kind of AI coaching route. Hard to say because one of the things about corporates is that they're very proprietary about what they do around leader development, so we don't really know. And then mentoring, this is an interesting one in terms of being augmented, where you have a developmental relationship usually with someone with more experience in an industry or a function that you are interested in, where AI could be most helpfully in mentoring. I don't think AI can mentor, but I think AI can help mentors become better mentors. I mean, one of the things about mentoring, there's no barrier to entry to be a mentor. And there's no training, there's nothing, and we know that there are mentors out there who just are natural at doing it. And then we know that there are some that are out there that are, destroying a lot of value. That help to put them into roles or tasks that make them a bit uncomfortable in order to stretch. I think this will be augmented in this way, that AI will be able to help people in their job assignments extract the lessons of experience much more quickly than how it's typically done. One of the, we talk about experience for development as if learning from experience is easy. And it's not, because experience, sometimes we don't know what we're supposed to learn from an experience. Second, we don't know if we've learned from that experience. And third, we don't know if there's other things we should have learned from this experience. So AI can help guide that experience for development. Action learning is project-based development where people work in teams. And I think in this particular case, the augmentation comes in as using AI as a tool to help elevate the learning on par with the action. One of the things that I've seen in organizations of all kinds is that you put people into action learning teams to do a project, they focus on getting the project done and very little on what they're learning and developing from it. So AI can help elevate that. Classroom training, classrooms, who needs those stinking classrooms, right? Anything you can do in a classroom, you can do through AI in real time, anywhere, any place. And the last one is, that I put up here, leadership simulations, which are putting people into stretch assignments in a simulated context where they can fail and fail safely. You think about flight simulators. What are they really good at? They're really good at helping you learn when you crash the plane, why you crash the plane, so you don't crash the plane when it really matters. So I think with leadership simulations, again, AI can help generate the content for these simulations, can help with other AI platforms actually arrange for them, and they may be able to do it in a way that's tailored to you and your developmental needs. I mean, one of the things we know about simulations, very expensive, and as a result, they tend to be kind of, let's choose some things that we want to focus on, and everybody goes through the same simulation. What if the simulation was developed uniquely for your needs to help put you into stretch assignments in a safe context that's also giving you real-time feedback? So these leadership practices are disrupted. With the processes, there's heaps of disruption in the processes. What I mean by processes and how they differ, when you think about something like reflection, that's not a typical practice that's provided by a vendor. It's a process that people use as part of the development. And I think these processes are also likely to be disrupted in many ways going forward. And let me tell you, give you an example of how and why that is the case. This came from a white paper from the Center for Creative Leadership a decade ago, 2014, where they were interviewing people who are either providing leader development or they're going through leader development kinds of interventions. What should be stopped or phased out in leader development? And the answer for one interviewee was, stop sending people to courses and programs. And I would say full stop right there. Full stop right there. Stop sending people to courses and programs, and especially those they don't want to go to. So this whole notion of courses and programs, we need to rethink this, because I really believe they're going away. And this has been really the primary commodity in the multi-billion-dollar marketplace of leader development. So what is the alternative then? Well, let's talk about moving from programs to systems. And I'm cognizant of the time here, so I might skip through this very quickly, but it's an important slide because it oversimplifies what systems are, but it gives you something to think about in terms of how systems differ from programs. So this is a system based on open systems principles from Katz and Kahn back in the social psychology of organizations. And what you have here is some input in leadership development. There's energy or motivation to develop. There's throughput. There's some learning, some transformation that happens. There's behavior, sense-making practice that is then output into the environment. For the most cases, leadership programs are closed systems because there is no feedback loop involved. Now, I know that because I've talked with some of you who are trying to embed ongoing learning and feedback into what you are providing to participants, but for the most part, we assume that if people have gone through a program, they're going to take it back into their organization and practice. And I think that's an unrealistic assumption. And from my perspective, I think there are three things that can happen when you send people away to a program to develop. Three things that can happen, two of them are bad. The first one is the good one, and this is the one we assume happens, that people go off to a program, they have a great experience, they learn a lot, they're transformed as leaders, and in their leadership they come back in their organization, everybody welcomes them back as the returning hero, they implement all of this new development stuff, and performance goes up. You see where I'm going with this? So that's what we think happens. The second scenario is people go off to a program, they come back into their organization, they try to implement all this new stuff, and somebody, usually their boss, goes, "What the hell is this? Well, we sent you off to this program because we thought there was a reward. We thought you were a good leader. And you come back and you want to change everything up." And so the person gets frustrated and reverts to where they were before, and all that investment in their development is gone. And the third scenario is the same as the second one, is that they come back, the boss says, "We don't want any of this stuff." They get frustrated and they leave. So, when we talk about programs and sending people away to develop, we really need to think much more carefully about what outcomes are likely to happen when they return to their work. Because we know from Change Management 101, sending a changed person back to an unchanged system is a recipe in futility. And yet we do it again and again and again. So, let me just say, an open system is one that constitutes cycles of events. It's not a singular event, it's a cycle of event where people take what they have learned into the environment, get feedback about this new learning, which serves as input into the next developmental cycle. So it's continuous and ongoing, not a one-off. And I think this is the key, even though this is really a very simplistic view of what a system looks like, and it's not an entire system, but it's really kind of the central flywheel, the central gears that drive systems, which is this notion of cycles of events where people are learning something that they take into the environment, get feedback about it, and then revise and do that cycle again. One thing that I think we need to think about is what kinds of things people could do that are at a pretty simple level as opposed to expecting them to make huge changes. So I've got a couple of slides here that I'd like to wrap up with. So when we talk about leader development system principles, what are some key principles? Well, this is one most of us probably get. Instead of taking people away from their work to develop, you use ongoing work to help develop them as leaders. This one may be not so obvious. Instead of having other people design developmental experiences to helping developing leaders become the architects of their own bespoke developmental system. What contributes to a developmental system is having good developmental experiences. What is not an experience? Everything is an experience. But we know that good developmental experiences have, as part of it, aspects of assessment, challenge, and support. AI can be used as a tool, as a partner, to identify and leverage best practices, best evidence around assessment, challenge, and support, and embed it into ongoing experience in small ways. I don't know if any of you have read the book Atomic Habits, but it's this notion of very small behaviors, if they're repeated and practiced, can add up to huge changes. So some guidelines. Here's some things to think about in terms of what are key to a system. People need to own their development. Full stop. You cannot make anyone develop, just like you cannot make anyone change. And if you have, I won't go there, but you've probably been subject to someone who wanted you to change. How did that go? So understand what you are like, and there are plenty of ways on how to get people assessment data on what they are like. Get out of your comfort zone. Nobody develops when they're completely comfortable. Try new things in small ways and reflect on that feedback. One of the things that makes the human animal different from other species is our reflective ability to think about experiences and draw lessons from that. Do this in small ways on a regular basis in the gym of life. This is what I tell my students. It's like, where do you work out? You go to the gym. You want to work out as a leader? What do? You implement this in your everyday life. Don't think you need to go to some specialized gym with all of this fancy equipment in order to develop. It's out there. It's the water out there that you're in every day that is your gym to develop, and it's the gym of life. And this last one is massively overlooked. Help others do the same. Nobody does it alone, and by supporting others in their development and having them support you is a way to maximize this one version of collective leadership development. So in closing, what I'd like to remind you of the slide that I had about Peter Drucker at the beginning, which is this whole notion of the only thing we know about the future is that it's going to be different. But I think, sorry, it didn't quite get there yet, but it's the next slide, which is the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I think the mandate for leadership development professionals in this room is that you need to think about how you're going to create the future of leader development. Otherwise, it's just going to wash over you, and hopefully not, but potentially wash you away in terms of your practices and your businesses and other things. So create the future. So thank you very much for your attention, and especially at the end of a long day.